Everyone, and welcome to Topical, Tech's best talking show. I am your host, Brian Ross, and today we are talking with someone who I've been wanting to have this discussion with for quite some time since I started the show. I'm really excited. I hope you are too. But I'm very pleased to welcome Atlantic City City Councilman and web developer Jesse Kurtz. Thank you for coming on the show today, Jesse.
Hey, it's great to be here. I appreciate you thinking of me and the invitation.
You know, and part of the reason, not only because you're so well spoken and so good on camera, but I wanted to have you come on because there's very few people that I know of that are into the world of technology and also into the world of government. And I really wanted to sort of pick your brain and figure out kind of like what perspective that brings, having that technology background. I guess the first question I would have is, do you know, am I wrong in thinking that technology people in government, that's not a normal thing, right? Like a lot of elected officials are not people with a technology background. Is that right?
No, you're absolutely right about that. You'll get a few who want to come off and project themselves as being cool. So they'll show an article of the latest thing that Elon Musk is doing, or a new product from Apple or something. But fundamentally, there are not many people who have had that type of background, that type of education in computer science or technology, who engage in government and public policy. And so, believe it or not, like, I didn't realize that at the time because I actually started out, my undergraduate was in political science. So that's where I was going initially, classics. And so when I graduated with my bachelor's, I was qualified to bag groceries. And after struggling for a while to find employment, I picked up web development on the side. And it ended up being something I really enjoyed. And that was the inspiration for following that through to pursue a master's degree in computer science and to get, full-fledged into web development and technology. And it wasn't until one of my buddies in grad school mentioned to me, like, that's kind of cool that you're running for elected office and you're a tech guy. And I said, really? And it wasn't really until he said something that I was like, yeah, and I did some research on it. And as important as technology is for our economy and really for the country as a whole, those people that shape policy at the national level, or even at the state level for that matter, have very limited background in technology. So I think it's like a really good perspective. And it's also something, Brian, where, even if you think about like the different ways that like education and people's professional background shapes the way they see the world, right? Like the artist sees the world in one way, the folks that do law school see everything, risk averse, don't do any risk, let's avoid liability, etc. I think the technology background and really the technological framework for innovation and for seeing how our systems can improve the way that the world works for folks is a really great perspective to think of policy in that matter. Now, I'm a local official, and so what I've tried to do is really focus in on how technology can do two things. And one is bring greater transparency to government. And two is Atlantic City has, including my ward, the ward that I represent has a census tract in it that is in the top 5 for most diverse census tracts in the entire state. And so we have a lot of different languages that are spoken in Atlantic City. And I believe technology has the ability to make people's interaction with government and interaction with City Hall, licensing, et cetera, a lot easier by making things digital and enabling people to encounter that through their own devices and their own native language, especially while they're getting a hang for English.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. I think that you're absolutely right in that, whatever background you have coming into this really influences how you think about a lot of issues and how you approach them on a process level. I think that's absolutely right. And for those who are just joining, again, we are live on YouTube. We are live on Twitch. You can go ahead and put your comments in the chat, and we will see what it is you have to say. And I know I'm really excited to see what you have to say. I know the councilman, of course, would love to. Councilman, I think we could throw you right into the lines then, and you'd be all right. I mean, as an Atlantic City councilman, you've probably dealt with everything there is to deal with. So go ahead and put it.
You'd get a kick out of this one. For 13 meetings in a row, I was called public enemy #1. So that was something that, and it wasn't said with a smile either. And it was said by multiple people. And but no, I still smile about it. It's actually, I really enjoy it. I appreciate it, and it's very cool. Very cool.
And for those who may not know where you're coming from, of course, Atlantic City, and you're a councilman there. And how long have you been a councilman in Atlantic City?
This is my 6th year. So we do 4-year terms here in town. So I'm in the middle of my 2nd term here in Atlantic City City Council.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, that's all very exciting. I wanted to touch on something that you had just mentioned with sort of the procedures or the process-oriented thinking that a software developer might have versus a lawyer. And I was curious at the local level. I guess I would like for you to sort of peel the veil back a little bit and let me get a little bit of an insight into maybe a little bit more of what it is like on a local government, because I know for a lot of people, it's almost like a trope or a meme almost that local government or government in general is just behind the times technologically. And I was wondering, like, what is it? Do you see that the same way? Do you think local governments are really lagging behind with their technological capabilities? And in what way do you think, if it is at all? And if not, then I'd be really excited to hear about the developments and things of that nature. But I'm kind of curious how you see it on the ground level.
Sure. So it is, and before I dive into that, one of the comments says, do you love or hate that your title requires you to say city, city? And I say, I hate that. I don't like that at all. But on your question, so the fact is 6 years ago, and that's where I first started getting an in-depth look at the city and what we have and what we don't have. I was made chairman of the technology committee on city council, and I have to give credit to the council president at the time, who's now our mayor, because he actually listened to what I was saying about how I wanted to make permitting in the city as easy as it is to do e-commerce, where, why is it that I can order a big screen TV now and get it at my doorstep tomorrow? Well, not now, obviously, with the supply chain issues, there's some issues with that. Right. But back then, it was like, next day. And to get something as simple as a residential parking permit, it's like literally like cracking the code. It's like, how do you do that? Like, and so with that dichotomy, dove in, got a combined technology, licensing, inspections, health, and human services all in one combined committee to try to see technology and how it pertains to those areas of subject. But specifically on technology, I worked with our director at the time to do a real inventory, like where were our systems, where was our hardware, what's the roadmap for updating things. And I found out very quickly that there just was not a lot. We're very behind in terms of keeping the operating systems up to date, getting up to date hardware, even like system type upgrades were not happening on time. And in hindsight, it wasn't really the fault of the folks working there. It's just it wasn't a high enough priority for from a budget standpoint, and the people in charge that I found at the local level tend to be lawyers or folks that have the law school background, the legal background. And I really hope any lawyers listening to this don't take offense, but I just think that there's way too much of the lawyerly legal mindset in government, and as a result, it's just, too much anything is not a good thing, right? Like, you need that perspective there. But in our society, like people don't go around walking the street like, how do I avoid risk? How do I avoid liability? You know, is it gonna come behind me and mug me or something? Like, no, like, you know, you have technological innovation, risk is a part of that. And just the importance of maintaining your systems and your hardware the same way that you would maintain your car. That's the mindset that's needed. And so fast forward to today, we've made a lot of progress. And the city now does a form of permitting online. The different servers and the different equipment that we have has been updated, and kudos to the folks that work on it. But you know, we're still not quite there in terms of being cutting edge, but it's going to require, I think, more of an appreciation for those things that you don't see when you're updating your backbone, you know, the infrastructure of technology. And that's something that, you know, I think that we're getting closer to it. But the meme, the trope that you alluded to, that is definitely still the case fundamentally, that the public sector, the government is lagging behind private sector and really people's personal experiences with technology and then, you know, equipment that they own.
Well, that makes a lot more sense and gives me a little bit more of a clearer picture. And would you say that that's an issue that is confined to just maybe local governments, or do you think that this is something in your experience that goes all the way up to, let's say, the state level or even the federal level, with maybe you know, we can do a little bit better with our technological capabilities? Is that something that you think is pervasive throughout the entire ladder there?
It absolutely is, and there's been a lot of improvement when it comes to like, you know, personally identifiable data, things that deal with privacy issues. I think that the government has done a good job of tightening that up over the last several years. But where it's still like on like so-called secondary systems, where it still has these vulnerabilities and weaknesses, is that, you know, you read about these exploits where you know, people are crafting the automated system to like probe for these vulnerabilities. Like you always end up with just like it's like when they cast that net, you always end up with a lot of public systems that get caught up in that because it's normally like disjointed. People in government like to use that term siloed. You know, I think you hear it too much, but it betrays the fact that the various departments, especially like the IT asset, is normally like unique to those individual areas. And so there's not a great job of like combining the system, whether it's in general for security purposes or even for upgrades, for staying on top of the curve.
And you know, security is one of those things where it's one of those asymmetrical sorts of challenges where you have to cover every single security vulnerability, but the attacker only has to get right once. And then now it sounds like we have a system where we have to guard against that asymmetrical risk, and then we do that over in here, and then we have to do it over here as well, so that even if this one department is 100% secure, it's Fort Knox, the other ones could still be allowing access, you know, unintentionally. And we've seen, you know, the famous bugs like Stucknex, I believe it was called, where just one vulnerability in, you know, your printer system can lead to your entire network being compromised with something like that. And that's just, it seems to me like that should be a really high priority that's talked about more. And maybe I think having more people who have a technology background getting into politics is good. And going to a question from the chat from Galactic Bacon, he wants to know, question for Mr. Kurtz, do you feel like an outsider in politics as someone with a tech perspective? Do you think it helps you or makes it more difficult for you in politics?
So I'd say if I came to politics in general, strictly from the technology background, I think the answer would be yes, in a more general sense. And I actually think that would be good, because the whole thing of like looking at the problems of politics, government, life with fresh eyes, that's always needed in every time, every era, every year, really, to take a fresh look at problems which, you never fully solve the human condition, right? Like you just don't. You make improvements upon it, and you're always like, life is lived. Life is something that is exciting. There's a freshness to the decisions that we make and the things we create and invent. And so policy, government, if acting properly, would roll with that in a way, and see what's transpiring and respond to that to improve, or at least maintain the quality of life of the people who are the constituents there. But in my particular case, I actually kind of started out as the political animal and then came to technology later. So like sometimes when we're talking tech and dealing with tech, I feel a little bit about the outsider with folks on that one. So really, in my case, it's helped me, I believe, be almost like an outside insider or an inside outsider, or however which way you want to put it, in that, I really understand government. I've been around it for years. I've loved it. It's something my parents talked about at the kitchen table growing up, and it's just I've been imbued with it from a very early age. And when I started, I was one of the youngest council people elected in Atlantic City. And I'm still on the younger side doing this. So I really love the government piece, but having the background now in technology and with what I work in and what I really feel passionate about professionally, that's helped me, I think, not fall into that pattern of like the same old, staying stale. And it's definitely helped me continue to ask the questions like, all right, well, can we do it this way? Or what about introducing that? And I really credit that to, my background in computer science. And I think that anybody listening, anybody who has that background, absolutely should consider. Now, I wouldn't want everybody in elected office to be from a technological background, but it's like anything else, like the seesaw. It's so much towards the kind of the traditional lawyerly type background or that type of mindset, and there's not enough of the forward thinking kind of innovation, I believe, that comes with being familiar with computing and technology more broadly.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense, and I do want to sort of explore that with you a little bit, and obviously we don't want everyone in government to be from a Google background or something like that, but for those, at least in my experience dealing with engineers and of across all levels, it seems like everyone has very strong ideas and very strong opinions of what the government should be doing differently. And I've always wondered, how come more entrepreneurs don't and more tech people don't get involved in politics, given that, one, they have such a strong interest in it, and two, based on some of the campaigns that I've worked with, including yours, it seems like campaigning is really similar to entrepreneurship, because you're doing a lot of the same things. You're doing like the things that don't scale. You have to do a lot of things manually. You have to build up a pipeline, a data pipeline. You have to build up some systems. You have to get volunteers. And while the end goal is rather different, a lot of the grassroots energy of a startup and campaigns are really quite similar. So what would you say to someone who is in that technology background and is comfortable with engineering and now wants to go out into the public world and make some sort of difference? Would you recommend technology people get involved into politics, or do you think maybe the role of technologists would be to just create products and then leave the governing to the lawyers in that sort of sense?
Yeah, we really are picking on the lawyers here. So, and I should say, I actually thought I was going to go that route. I did mock trial in high school, and I took my LSATs after college, and I got cold feet. I read too many articles about the overabundance of lawyers in New Jersey, and I said, that was not for me. But I do think people with a technology background should consider it more of like a term of service as opposed to like a career, so to speak, because you're not going to get paid as well. There you go, and that's where I was going with it. If you've got the talent and the skill to make something happen, that's why you don't see them there. Now you do see folks that do very well and get to a point in life, like not quite retirement, but a point where they're comfortable, they're looking for another challenge. And I think people out of like a philanthropic or a humanitarian desire, like jump into public service or into government at that point. But I like to see more folks like, as they're kind of, biting their teeth on their startup project, and while they're like, in the grind, not necessarily from the comfort of success, but while they're in the grind, I'd like to see them during that point. Maybe they're not running for office at that point, but they're, volunteering with a campaign, that they're getting involved with a civic association, a trade association. A lot of times our tech trade associations have committees that look at public policy that nobody really wants to get involved in. I would encourage folks to do that and to get in there because that's, that it's very important. With elected office in general, you don't want solely wealthy people and people who are retired to be your elected officials. Now, it's easier for them in a lot of respects because they're not in that grind that I alluded to. But I think it's so important for representative government to be representative of everybody, right? So and that includes the folks that are in the grind, that they're in the grind, they're out of school a couple of years, they're starting their family out, they're young, they're trying to make it. And that's a perspective that is very much needed. And unless you have some folks from that type of demographic, from that type of life experience in elected office, sitting on a governing body, sitting around a table, then that perspective is treated more like a museum exhibit where, oh, that's cute that folks are struggling and in the grind, but it's not like, no, this is real, man. Like, I'm working real hard to make sure the food's there. I'm working real hard to make sure my loans are paid back, et cetera. So that's a very, very important thing. So I think no matter how much somebody's struggling or in the grind or well off, that they should really consider in their so-called productive years when they're young, given at least, a year, give a few months or so to being engaged. And I think that not only would they benefit, but everybody would benefit tremendously from having that involvement from them.
And that, I think, is something that you never hear anyone talk about is younger people or people in that grind, like you talked about, getting involved in politics. Because when I look on TV and I see politicians, they don't look like me. They're not young. They're not, from the same background. It seems to be mostly, older people who have had a whole life in politics already, or they've had a whole career already. And to have people, to hear you say that there's really the barrier to entry into politics seems to be really low. Like anyone can do it, but not everyone is willing to do what it takes in order to be, successful and run a campaign and things of that nature. And to hear it's pretty achievable. I guess if I could ask something like really concretely for someone who's watching that wanted to get involved in politics, what would first steps sort of look like for a technology? So to get involved in a campaign, like how do you do that? How do you find a campaign to get involved in? And what do you do? Do you have to just show up, or how do you? Because a lot of people, I think, don't even know where step one is, and once they get to step one, they can figure out the rest. But I guess where does step one happen?
So it's I'd say be local and focused. A lot of times the little bit of involvement that people have is more in the national type of dialogue and debate and like picking who they think should be president. But in reality, like that's more akin, to use a sports metaphor, like that's like being up in the 600 level and, nosebleed seats, yelling at some people that you can barely see. You need binoculars to see on the field. Whereas if you get involved locally, it's like sitting on the sideline. And ultimately, and it's so close, sometimes you sit on the sideline enough, you get to know the players and the coach, they might throw you in for a couple plays, and that's really where it comes to. And so I would encourage people, the local, just pop into a meeting of your local council, your local governing body, township committee, whatever that is. And also, see about your local political party. If they have club meetings, attend one. One of the good things about more of these meetings going virtual in light of the pandemic is that it's easier to participate. You can just zoom into a meeting and listen to it, get a little feel for it. And I think that, if you do that and you start developing a passion or an interest, at least, in the way that things should be, and you hear somebody that resonates with your ideas and your kind of way of life, reach out to them. And I think they'll be very appreciative for it. And that's really the start. I think that's the start.
It's really interesting because me having done this, a couple of years ago, where I did the thing where I showed up to meetings and things of that nature right at the beginning, it was fascinating to me, just how easy and welcoming everyone is when you show up to these things, because they're at the local level, they're really happy when someone shows up and they can get a good group of people together. So it's not like something where you have to know someone to get in there. You can just show up and then they'll be more than happy to take you and to get you involved. And, everyone always needs volunteers. That's something that is, I think, universal at any level of government and politics. And there's always a need for that sort of outside perspective to come in and have young people, especially not just the retirees, even though we love the retirees. We think they're fantastic. But it's great to have, like you said, representatives from all aspects of society. I do want to switch gears here a little bit, because I'm curious, kind of, it almost seems as if the government maybe does a disservice when it doesn't think about technology and technological aspects. Because when I think about privacy and security, how do you parse this question out? How do you think about how government and technology come together in terms of privacy? Do you think we think about big tech companies having a lot of data on individuals, and of course, the government has capabilities to find information out on people, and technology can only aid those efforts. And then I'm wondering, how can you square greater technological abilities, greater surveillance capabilities, greater knowledge of just everything that's going on? How do you square that with other aspects of society and privacy and making sure people's rights are preserved? Do you have any useful, I don't know, maybe like a heuristic or maybe some way to think about those types of questions? How do you approach that?
Sure. So I think that, for starters, I think that one of the ways to, think of this question is in light of the Fourth Amendment. So, I mean, we have, the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures in this country. And, I'd like to see folks that do kind of almost technical theory explore the implications of the technology, and more so its application in, what that means in light of the rights and protections of the Fourth Amendment. I think that's a very fertile ground. I'd like to see folks that explore that question. I think that's one way to see it. I also think that one of the kind of entryways that I take on it, and I've started exploring this this year, is when you see some of the issues that are happening to young people when it comes to getting like a bad moment captured on social media, and that's just one moment that they have. But because of the nature of social media, it's literally defining them for the rest of their life. And if, as long as they get through, their education and they're out there in the world, it's something that employers may see, or HR departments, and kind of use it to disqualify them from earning a living. But worse than that and more immediate is you see the connection with things like depression and drug use and suicide and all these things that are stemming from the fact that, like, by the nature of these platforms, young people who are normally given the opportunity to remain anonymous, like even when they commit crimes, right, in the juvenile criminal code, they're given an opportunity for redemption and to get through, is that doesn't happen because of how pervasive these things are in the platforms. And I think that we need to get serious about instilling another right, and that's the right to be forgotten. And I think that the right to be forgotten for folks, especially on the younger side, needs to be built into these programs, into the way that they even handle media types and the way that they process images and videos, to find ways that they can be removed. And I think that that's something that we have to start getting serious about. And you'd like to see that happen at the national level. But until we get a lot more folks like us in Congress, I don't see that happening at the national level. So I'd like to see some states, I'd like to see that state type of policy for people to drive that conversation. And I think that people will be very sincere about wanting to do something about all the constituent pieces in there. You talk about parsing out the question, but they're very reluctant to understand how that then fits in with the technology piece, or in this case, the social media platform, and that's something that I think we have to get serious about. And I think, lastly, when it comes to privacy in general, people have to realize we're not defined by technology. Technology is a tool for us, it's but I don't think people put that together enough. And so we have to instill the way that we use technology with our values, such as privacy, and we have to just insist on it as consumers, and we have to insist on it as people who are knowledgeable about that background, to insist that we're going to have a society that values the individuals, our rights, and our privacies, and not one where that's all second fiddle to the ability of a corporation to sell that data to make a profit.
Yeah, and I think that conversation happens a lot more in technology circles than it does maybe in any other circle, because I think we can see firsthand, it's one thing to know that, someone has, your email address and your user information and your date of birth and all that sort of stuff. But when you're building applications and you start collecting this information, you start to see whoa, I have a lot of information on people. They gave it to me completely for free. And if I can have that information, who else can have that information? I guess anyone that builds anything. And especially with just the nature of the internet being, once something's out there, there's nothing stopping it from being infinitely reproduced. And that's such an interesting challenge. How do we build in, just like the chat says, hey, Jordan says, I like that, right? Built-in data obsolescence. And I think that's got to be something that we have to really figure out how we can make that work in that battle between those, because, if a bad person does a bad thing, it makes sense to want to have that around and to always be oh, look at this bad guy doing this bad thing. But we talked about, how we treat these sorts of issues from a legal sense, for juveniles and things of that nature. There's no crime out there that has a permanent, lifelong effect besides the most heinous of crimes. And it seems like now it's lumped in where a social media post is now lumped in with, almost murder in the court of public opinion, because your outcome is the same. Effectively, you're not going to be employable. No one's going to want to talk to you, et cetera, et cetera. It's just, you can be put in a very tough situation. That's probably a poor analogy, but I think the point is worth discussing, the thought experiment there. And I think that's really, really interesting to think about. And I don't know if we're going to be getting that prioritization, like you talked about earlier, without more technology people in government. And one aspect that I really wanted to talk to you about was in New Jersey, when we had COVID, I think had just really started to ramp up. People were really starting to get serious, and the unemployment claims in New Jersey started to roll in. And all of a sudden, this unemployment system, which is 40 years old, which in technology terms might as well be 400 years old. Now we had Governor Phil Murphy going out and saying, we need volunteer COBOL programmers to help us update these systems. And I thought, man, oh man, I don't know where you're going to find 1,000 COBOL programmers to volunteer. Did you see that story? What did you think of that?
I mean, that was remarkable. I almost had to like read it twice or three times, like, what language? Like, and I was like thinking in my head, like, I remember even when we did like the history of programming languages as one of my grad courses, like, I think that was the last time I had like heard reference to that language. And yeah, I remember like encountering people that like, yeah, I remember doing that on the mainframe, you know, like those are those kind of things. And like they literally were pulling people out of retirement to give a few hours, which, you know, I know they needed to do that in order to get that skill set in the door. But if you think about it from everything we've been talking about earlier in this show, security, you know, like overlap, those things, like, being so desperate that like you're literally like going down the street and like looking into crevices for, you know, do you know Cobalt? You know what I mean? Like, you know, one of those things like that is not a professional way to do things, and it betrays the fact.
You know Cobalt? You know what? You know that's Cobalt?
Yeah, and it shows like that's where like all that like not exciting things like upgrading your system, like that has to be more of a priority, and it's almost.
But why do we need to update it? It works now. It works today. Why update? That's the sort of question.
But that story should then serve as the justification then for IT folks. Hopefully that'll be like a lifeline for them as they're trying to justify the budget line for like, hey, upgrading the system. Hey, do you want this to, you know, do you want our, you know, parking ticket system to have the same fate as the unemployment claims processing system here? You know, you got to put a little money into it. And that's, yeah, that's something where that was almost like a tour down memory lane for everybody to learn about the history of these languages, you know, when that story happened. But no, they have to, there has to be more kind of forward thinking on those things, because with government, it's supposed to be there at bad times for folks, right? So like by the time you need the system and it's overwhelmed, it's already too late to upgrade it and make the adjustment. And so that's almost like where that type of system needs the upgrade more than some others.
And I wonder, because this is a system that was built 40 years ago, and we've just probably been duct taping things together as time has gone on. And I almost wonder, do you think it makes sense to have the government employing software engineers to be building these sorts of applications? Or does it make more sense for the government to just say, you know what, just throw up their hands, you know what, forget about it, we're not going to build anything. Instead, we're just going to throw money, we're going to give money to Salesforce, we're going to give money to Google, we're going to give money to Gusto, and then we're going to let these companies come in, and they're just going to be building the systems, and we'll just, you know, hire a small IT department to make sure people's computers turn on. But all of this, we're just going to start outsourcing and to bigger companies. And one example that I think of was with the Affordable Care Act, when we had to build the website for people to sign up for the health insurance during the years of Obama. And it, you know, the cost was very high and it was a mess. And then ended up, they had to bring people from the outside in anyway to sort of fix what had gone wrong or what happened. And then when I think about that and I say it out loud, I think about what a nightmare it's going to be with that government contracting process, because, you know, you got to contract all this out to a company, and it just seems like, you know, that's not the way, that's not the software development life cycle doesn't follow government contractual procedures. You know, you want to put something out, figure out how it's broken, and then iterate and improve and fix it really rapidly and quickly. And I don't know how that I'm trying to figure out what the best relationship is there between, you know, those sorts of issues. What do you think about that?
Cool. Well, I mean, I think my answer stems from my experience at the local level. When I started out, I mentioned I've been the tech chair. I was tech chair for 4 years. And during that time, we went from having a director and some in-house staff to the director left, and we went to almost fully outsourcing to an IT firm. And then subsequently, we brought another director back, and it's more of a hybrid. So it's more of the two. And through that, it's the one case where I actually was part of the hiring committees. I was part of like scoping out the departmental shape. And I learned that the kind of position we needed, just going back a few years ago, we weren't allowed to hire somebody at the local level because the job title was only available at the state level, namely a software development specialist, an SDS title.
The job, hold on, I'm sorry. The job title was only available at the state level. What does that,
so state government or a state government agency or department could hire a software development specialist, but not municipal government, because you have to hire somebody in accord with an accepted or approved job title in the state of New Jersey, because all those job titles go through something called the Civil Service Commission, and they get approved ahead of time through this body. And one of the small things that I did, and we never ended up hiring a software development specialist, but through my like adamance, I was like, we need this position here to like make things work and to like tie it together, because we didn't need, and frankly, we couldn't afford for one person to like build the system that would have handled online permitting, but like we needed one person that was going to do the custom tie-ins to these systems that like our police record system needed through their department, or the fire or civilian, like whatever it was. And one of my like little victories that won't really do much of anything, that and $2 will get me a cup of coffee, is like I got approval for us to start to hire. So now if we wanted to hire a software development specialist, we could, got the job title, but it was like a lot of effort to even get that to happen. Wow. Without going more into the bureaucracy piece, I bring that out to show that like I think a mixed model makes sense for government. And I know from a federal entity that's in our backyard here, because in Atlantic City, we have the Federal Aviation Administration Technical Center. And it's really, any type of research and development, aviation, innovation comes through the FAA Tech Center at some point in South Jersey. And they do a tremendous amount of contract work with folks in a very good way. Like they're very much know what they're doing. So the folks that like are contract administrators out there, they would be the people that like, if I ever became president, I would loop them in to the federal office and say, hey, how do we like dissect out your workflow and your process, and then spell or scan that across federal government, or similarly in a state government. And that would be the way to do it, I believe, something like the FAA. And they're not the only agency. They happen to be the one I know about because they're in my backyard. But like any of these federal agencies that are dealing with technology, even some of like the oceanic stuff or the seas, like that would be where you would find that you're going to need a mix of existing enterprise level systems, but then also folks and a talent pool that can adapt that to the particular needs of the organization.
See, that's fascinating. And for those who may not be familiar, in little old Egg Harbor Township, New Jersey, there's this tech center, and tell me if you probably are more familiar with it even than me, but it's like a big area where all these different airplane technology companies get together and they do research and they do testing, and they build software for airplanes and other things for defense. And I know at my house you can look up and you can see them flying around jets all the time. Sometimes their jets that look way different than anything you've ever seen. They're pretty wild looking, and you can tell these are like test development aircraft, and it's kind of a cool thing. And I've always thought, what a neat idea that the government has just sort of stepped back and said, all right, we want to do research and development. We know that the private sector, there's companies that are experts in all the multifaceted areas of airplane development, because you'll have a company that just focuses on like on gauges or something, or just on the piston movement or something. Everything has its own individual niche, and for every niche it seems like there's a company for it. And in Egg Harbor Township, they have a space where all these companies can get together, and I would assume that there's some cross collaboration, although I know everything is siloed, especially for defense purposes. But it seems like that is an exciting model where the government says, we want innovation, we want this type of innovation, we're going to give you everything you could possibly want and need in this location. We'll support you. We'll give you the infrastructure. We'll give you whatever tax incentives you want. And in return, you're going to provide a lot of high-paying jobs to the economy. We're going to get some economic benefits. We're going to get some military benefits. We'll get benefits across the board. And hearing you say that, and now me saying it out loud, it makes me think maybe that is probably the best way to go about it. And the government can take sort of what we can learn from cities like San Francisco or cities like Austin, and think about, well, could we do that in maybe other communities around the country? Could we build something where maybe in an economically disadvantaged area where, this could be people's ticket out of poverty is software engineering and technology. And that could be something that I think is really, really exciting going forward. Do you think that maybe that sort of model would work? Is the FAA Tech Center, is that just maybe one example of something that's gone right? Or could that even serve as a model for things in the future for maybe other states, other governments?
No, I mean, I think it's definitely an example of how government can engage private companies in specific work goals towards like improving an overall system. So, for example, if you had to overhaul, anything like, let's say like Social Security computing system or something along those lines, I would look to, so I would at least have the people who are going to manage that project and run point on it, go and shadow some of the folks at a place like the FAA Tech Center to see best practices on that collaboration between government and private industry. But then going a step further in terms of social mobility and giving people opportunity, I think that there are a lot of really good examples of that out there where people are doing that. And so it's not that I think I have like one example versus another, but the one area that I've been thinking a lot about, because we have a state college that recently built a campus, not only in my city, but in my ward, the ward I represent. So they built a campus here. And so students who wouldn't normally encounter Atlantic City, and I'm always focused on my city and trying to get it revitalized and rebirthed and all of that. So we've got like 400 students that wouldn't normally be in the neighborhoods, and they're seeing it's like pretty neat place. It's not as bad as I thought it was. Here's how I'm seeing like that. And I'd like to have folks like that build out a technology industry here, to really help, whether it's with iGaming from the casino side or just anything along those lines. And so I think the idea of postgraduate incubator / collaborative housing projects, like that's something I've really been trying to get out there. And I think that's a good model, that not only do you recruit people from areas that are less advantaged, but that you also use the opportunity that once you get somebody into college, it's not just like, hey, they take off to the cities and they're gone, that you keep them in an area that could really benefit from their entrepreneurial spirit. And that when, for example, if you got a building and you're able to put 20 graduates in it and you had really low rent, but in exchange for 1 year's worth of low rent, they had to collaborate on projects with one another. They had to do like an incubator shared space. They had to teach a certain number of classes to the community and to other groups in exchange for their rent. While working on their idea of 20, you may get one that works, maybe two. Well, that one or two that works each year from the kids that went to school in the city, they then have to find office space near there. And then you start literally building out industries and ideas on a small scale. And I think something like that is a very powerful way to see things through in terms of entire cycles, instead of like having like glimmers of hope that then get extinguished and then everybody's as bitter as they were, in the beginning.
Right, the flash in the pan sort of thing. Right, absolutely. And I think, I'm from New Jersey, of course, but I'm in San Francisco right now visiting, and it's funny to walk around and I just see it really feels a lot like Atlantic City or at least what it could be in the future once, you know, a few tech companies get started there. And I think the first few are harder than the last few because the network effects, you know, once you get one big company in and they start hiring, well, you know, other people are going to maybe bring their companies there too, because they'll see this great deal with the cheap rent, and you still have, I think it's probably got to be the cheapest waterfront property in the entire country, as far as I'm concerned. It's on an ocean that you can go to in the summer. That's nice. I mean, you know, I think we have fine beaches, fantastic beaches. So I've always been thinking about Atlantic City as being like maybe the next San Francisco of the East Coast sort of deal, and maybe, just maybe, we can learn some of the lessons from San Francisco and from, you know, some of the problems, and sort of hopefully avoid some of those issues, which is kind of the whole goal of everything. You know, take more steps forward than you do backward, sort of idea. And I think that that's fascinating. And Stockton University, of course, is the university you're talking about. We've had Stockton students come on the show, and it's been just a fantastic time always talking to them, and I think it's just great. And going to the comments, Shahir Ali on YouTube comments, check out Bitwise Industries. They do exactly that. They use technology to revitalize low-income communities by rehabbing rundown commercial spaces, turn them into tech centers, and then lease out to co-working spaces and teach computer programming. That's Bitwise Industries. Yeah, that sounds like a pretty exciting deal there. And I think that's probably the model that might be able to, and tell me if you think I'm right, when we talk about eradicating poverty, or trying to bring people's socioeconomic from one level, let's say, to a higher level, or to, you know, something that's more in line with what they want out of life. I've tried a few different industries, and I can tell you that computer science seems to be one of the best. I've been telling people it's one of the best tickets out of poverty that really exists, because, you know, once you graduate, you're immediately employable. You're immediately relevant in the marketplace, and I think that that's just absolutely fantastic. And I'm curious, is that not only would the city and would we get like cool stuff from the products, but from products that the technology companies make, but it seems, do you share my opinion that perhaps technology and incubators and innovation and computer science degrees and all that, do you think that that could be one of the greatest ingredients for I guess, you know, let's say a mini golden age in an area, or for lifting people out of their situation, should they so want to do so?
You know, absolutely. And I think that there's two parts to it. It being what you're referring to. Like, the first part is absolutely get an education in computing, computer science is a real lifeline. It's you know, and you and anybody else who's you know, listening right now, you know, stay strong in your studies, persevere. It's a ticket to, you know, having a really nice future, doing well off in life, and, you know, being in a position to help out others too. You know, the better off you're doing, the more that you can help others. And so that's fantastic, and that's true. When it comes to a particular place, so like if you think of yourself as someone that, you know, grew up with humble beginnings, and you go through that type of education, you're out there in the workforce, well, most likely that journey is going to take you somewhere away from home. And so the problem becomes, and I think about this as home, Atlantic City, it said, all right, we do pretty well, and we're getting better with outreach to folks when they're young, and getting them help and putting them on a better trajectory. And then down the road, when they do well and they're running the company and they could live anywhere, or they're retired, they move back to town and they live here. But the spot where we miss out on folks, and I see this with people I grew up with that like went off to college and are doing well for themselves, so many of them left town and didn't come back. And so that's where I believe the incubator type model and building that up is so essential to rebuilding the place. And so the physical spot here, so like you take your people that are so important, get them educated, get them the skills, they're ready to roll, and then you have a spot, an entry-level job, an ecosystem for entrepreneurial activity where they can thrive and have support that's here, instead of having to leave, succeed, and then come back and try to like reverse engineer it and everything. We've got to kind of outline and have an industry here, have a company, a corporation that they can get that entry level job, plus that ecosystem for more of the startup type mindset. And the great opportunity, as I see it, is that so many people are leaving the established cities because of the COVID situation and the cost of things, and the kind of how close knit everyone is, that the people, it made them feel uncomfortable. So they left the cities because they could work from anywhere. And Atlantic City, where I'm from, like I think we're in a great spot that people could live somewhere next to an ocean where it's more airy, it's breezier, you can go running on the boardwalk, there's a lot of amenities here, and then still be able to commute into the larger cities for a meeting once or twice a month or once a week if you had to for that. And so one of the things I think that really is my challenge as a leader here is to try to court people who are investors to build up that infrastructure here, so we have more shared space, so we have more opportunities for folks to build that community of entrepreneurs and startups. And so if we're successful in that, I think that'll help Atlantic City thrive into the future. But regardless, anybody listening to this, if you're thinking about it, dive into technology, no doubt about it, there's a bright future ahead for you.
Awesome. And unfortunately, I've just been having such a blast. I'd love to keep you on for another 5 hours and pick your brain about all this. But unfortunately, we only have 5 more minutes. So I guess to round it out here, is there any parting words you would say to the young engineers out there who want to make a big impact in the world and that sort of thing? Is there any sort of overarching words of wisdom that you would like people to take away from all of this?
Hey, what I mean, for starters, thank you, for the time, and for anybody listening to this, appreciate you taking the time to, listen to our conversation. It's definitely a lot of fun. So I think, however you pursue your future in engineering, in coding and networking, whatever you're doing, the company where you are, try to, whether it's through your company or a trade association, to, get involved in that aspect of public service, public policy, and make sure that your opinion, your mindset, that you're lending it to the public discourse, to this exchange of ideas. And because society is going to change whether you're involved or not. And you as a technical person have a lot to offer for that. And so get in there, shape it. I think that people, really owe it to themselves to get more acquainted with things like rights and the Fourth Amendment and things like that, see how it has an effect on technology, and to speak out on that, to write about it, to talk about that. But no, absolutely. I think in terms of change and shaping society, make it a point to be aware of what's happening civically and in government. And don't be afraid to use your technological mindset to propose solutions, to offer revisions to things that are going on, and to reach out to politicos like me. Befriend us, let us know where we're doing things wrong, and then when we're doing it right, and get involved.
And how could someone, if someone wanted to get in contact with you or follow what it is you're doing, and what would be a good way for them to do that?
So my handle is normally at Councilman Kurtz. So that's normally my handle. Okay. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, and that would be probably a great way to just interact with me. And then if everyone send me an email, it's Jesse O. Kurtz. So it's just my name that's up there with the middle initial O, Jesse O. Kurtz @gmail.com. And, I'd love to have a dialogue. If I could be helpful, answer a question, I'm here. But yeah, more than anything, I really appreciate your time. And, thanks for having me on Tech Topical. This was a blast.
And thank you so much for coming, Mr. Councilman Jesse Kurtz. I really appreciate you coming on. I think that was a fantastic talk. I know I learned a lot. And that's why people, people have been saying Tech Topical, it's tech's best talking show. And I think this is why no one else is giving this type of high level insight into the local governments and local politics and technology. In fact, I got to pat myself on the back here, and I've never seen any talks like these, and I've looked for them. Yeah, thank you. So maybe if I have any more government and technology questions, I guess you'll be around, right? I could ask you to come back on, I'm sure.
Sure. Hey, we don't want to bore people, not too soon, but sometime in the future.
Of course. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. And thank you all for watching. This has been Tech Topical, Tech's Best Talking Show. I am your host, Brian Ross. I will see you next week, Saturday, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I will see you all next time. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.